Hey everyone, this is MusicTechHelpGuy. In this video, I'll show you how to get started in Reaper 5. For this video, I'm using version 5.984, and I'm working in Mac OS, but I'll mention Windows-specific shortcuts, and I'll try to mention some other Windows-specific things as well along the way. So if you're a Windows user, you should be able to follow along just fine. So in this video, specifically, I'll demonstrate how to set up an audio interface or a built-in microphone and built-in output, how to navigate Reaper using the transport controls, zoom controls, and just generally how to get around in Reaper, how to use tracks to work with audio loops, so importing them, editing them, and syncing them to tempo, how to record audio using an audio interface and a microphone, and also an introduction to working with MIDI and virtual instruments. So keep in mind that everything in this video is really basic, and I'll dive into some deeper topics in later videos in this series. Now, Reaper's popularity seems to really be growing because people who are new to recording find that it's a very affordable digital audio workstation, or DAW, or DAW for short, and it has a long 60-day trial period. Others who have experience with other DAWs have decided to make the switch because of how well Reaper runs and how it doesn't bog down your computer with unnecessary features. Reaper does exactly what it's supposed to do without any unnecessary whistles and bells, and it does it really well. So to get started, you need to set up your audio input and output device. To do this, go up to Reaper, Preferences, and then go to Audio Device in the menu. Now, if you're working on a PC, you won't see this Reaper tab here. So you'll have to go over to Options, go down to the bottom of the menu, and you'll see Preferences. So right here under Audio Device, you can see that I'm using a Scarlett Solo USB audio interface. This is from Focusrite. It's a really cheap one. It's a little over $100. Now, your audio interface is important for recording because it handles your input information and your output information. So input being things like plugging a microphone into it, plugging a DI instrument into it like guitar or bass or keyboards, and output being able to send the signal out to speakers or headphones and having a built-in volume control. So I highly recommend that you get an audio interface if you don't have one and you're looking at getting into audio recording for really any reason. Now, if you're trying to use the built-in microphone on your computer and use the built-in output, what you're going to want to do is click this Allow Use of Different Input and Output Devices. And then what you'll do is for the input device, you'll select your computer's built-in microphone, and then you'll select the built-in output, which is just the main speakers on your computer, or if you plug headphones in, it'll switch to headphones. Now, if you're a Mac user, there's one really important thing you have to remember to do even before you open up Reaper. Go up to the Apple icon, go down to System Preferences, and from here, go to Security and Privacy, and then under the Privacy tab, go to Microphone, and make sure that you've given Reaper access to your microphone. If you don't do this, you won't be able to get any signal when you're trying to record either with your built-in mic or an external mic with an audio interface. Now, if you're a Windows user, you may need to download a separate driver to get your audio interface to properly communicate with Reaper. This can be a driver included with your audio interface from the company that made your audio interface, or a third-party driver that's universal, like ASIO for All. You can get this at asioforall.org. So make sure you install your device driver before launching Reaper. Your Windows device panel will look a little different than the Mac panel. If you're using an audio interface, your setup might look something like this, but it'll vary from device to device. If you have more than 2 inputs and outputs on your audio interface, you'll want to set the first and last input and output on the device here to make sure that all of your available input and outputs show up in Reaper. Next, I'll show you how to navigate Reaper, as well as how to work with loops. So I have a drum loop here. I'll just drag this right into the timeline in Reaper, and this will automatically create a new track for us. To play back the loop, you can use Reaper's built-in transport controls here, or better yet, you can memorize a few basic shortcuts for these. To play, you can press spacebar or enter or return on a Mac. And then you can press spacebar again or return or enter again to stop. The difference is that when you use spacebar, this starts and stops playback. And you'll see that the playhead returns to the beginning, or it returns to wherever it started. So you can click anywhere up here on the ruler for the timeline, and you can set the start point for the playback of the audio. And then when I press spacebar again, the playhead goes back to the starting point. If you use return for this instead, the playhead will move forward. So this is a pause control rather than a stop control. You can also set the playhead back to the beginning by pressing W. So this makes it really easy to jump back to the beginning of the project no matter where the playhead is set. You can drag over the ruler up here to create a selection with these locators up here. And you can click here to toggle the repeat function or loop function. And it'll loop the area between the locators continuously. You can also use the shortcut R on your keyboard to toggle this. So I'll set my locators to a range of exactly 8 bars. So you can see right here, this says 8.1.00. So this is the 8th measure or 8th bar of the session. And you can see it's split up into 4 beats. We'll talk more about the grid and editing to the grid in a later video. But you can see that the loop does not match up exactly with the tempo of the project. I actually got this loop from splice.com, and the loop actually gives you some information about the loop just in the file name. The 140 is actually referring to the tempo of the loop. So if you come down here, you'll see that the beats per minute, or BPM, of the project is only 120. So you would think that if I change the tempo to 140, that the loop would now perfectly conform to that 8-bar selection, but it doesn't. In Reaper, audio regions will automatically conform to any tempo changes you make to the project. So this loop right now is actually going to play back faster. Now there is a workaround for this, so I'll double click and I'll set this back to 120 BPM. And what you have to do is right click on the track header, go down to track time base, and change the time base to time. In short, the time base controls how a track conforms its information to timing references. So if I use the project time base, it's going to stretch and compress as I change the tempo. If I set this to time, it's no longer going to conform to those tempo changes. So now I can go back here and double click on this and change the tempo to 140, and you'll see now the loop perfectly conforms to an 8-bar loop. Now, right now I can see the entire loop here in my view. Another important feature to know in Reaper is how to zoom the content within your project. So down in the bottom right corner here, there's a horizontal zoom right here, and then there's vertical zoom right here. However, it's kind of a pain to have to use your mouse to zoom in and zoom out. So there's a few really helpful shortcuts to remember for this. So horizontal zoom is the minus sign and plus sign on your keyboard. So that's your horizontal zoom. And then vertical zoom is page up and page down. I have a small keyboard without page up and page down on it, so I can't demonstrate that here. However, if you have a mouse with a scroll wheel, you can scroll up and down for horizontal zoom, and then you can hold Command and scroll on a Mac to vertical zoom, and you can hold Control and scroll on a PC to do the same thing. And you can also manually adjust the height of a track right here. So let's say that you want the loop to conform to your project tempo rather than the project conforming to the loop tempo. Let me just change the tempo to 130 BPM, so just a touch slower, and you'll see that the length of the loop is a little short. In Reaper, there's a built-in trim tool if you hover over the left or right side of any audio region, and you can click and drag to trim in or trim out. And if you go further than the duration of the loop or the audio region, it'll automatically loop the loop. So you'll see like a joining point right here. Also, you'll notice that when I use this trim tool, it snaps the edits to the grid. You can actually turn off your grid snap right here, or you can use Option S on a Mac or Alt S on a PC to toggle this. So then you can edit freely on the grid without snapping to anything. So this next thing I'm going to show you, I do want the edit to snap to the grid. So I've got my grid snap turned back on. If you hold Option or Alt on a PC while you trim, this will actually allow you to time expand or compress, and this works with any audio region. So what I can do is stretch this loop out to be exactly 8 bars long at 130 BPM, even though the tempo of the original loop was 140 BPM. And now you can hear that the loop is playing back a bit slower. One thing to note too is that you can see here that the track is clipping. So you can click on that clip light to get rid of it. But what I'm going to do is go down to my mixer and pull down the level of my drum loop to keep it from clipping and also to keep the master output from clipping as well. So for each track you have up here in the main window, you'll see a corresponding channel strip down here in the mixer, and then all of your channel strips, the sum of all of those channel strips, go to the master output or master fader here. You can also press Command M on a Mac or Control M on a PC to toggle the mixer. Now let's say that I only want to use half of this drum loop. Maybe I want to get rid of everything from bar 5 all the way over to bar 8. Well, I can use that integrated trim tool again to trim off the back 4 measures of the loop. And now I just have a 4-bar loop to work with. And if I want to repeat this, I can click and drag while holding Command to duplicate the region. You'd hold Control on a PC to do the same thing. I have another loop here I'll pull in. It's just a keyboard loop. And let's see what this sounds like. It's obviously not at the same tempo, so it's probably not going to sound too great. Yeah, so they don't match up at all. So I could do 2 things here. One, I could hold Option and drag this out to 8 bars and make it slower and match it up with the tempo of the project. Or I could make this a shorter 4-bar loop. So I'll pull this in to be exactly 4 bars long. I think it sounds better as an 8-bar loop, so I'll go ahead and pull that back out to 8 bars. So it sounds like the keyboard loop is a bit out of time on a couple of these notes here. Now there is a way to correct this with stretch markers, which I'll demonstrate in a later video, but another way to fix this is to simply replace these first 2 repetitions with the 3rd repetition here, which is in time. So a way to separate your audio region without using the trim tool is you can just press S, and this will separate the region wherever you place the playhead. So then what I'll do is I'll place the playhead here as well, select the region, and then click S again to separate. Then what I'll do is I'll just simply duplicate these over by holding Command while moving them, like I showed you before. And now I have 3 repetitions of the same part of the loop, and then the ending part of the loop. When you have more than one track in your project, you may want to mute or solo a channel so that you don't hear it or that you only hear it. So I can press the M button here to mute a channel, or I can press the S button to solo a channel. Reaper makes it incredibly easy to transpose audio regions. So let's say that I want my keyboard loop here to be in a different key. So what I can do is click on the first one, click on the last audio region while holding Shift just to select them all. And there's a quick shortcut for this. Shift 9 will transpose the audio region down in semitones. So you can see here it says pitch -5. So it's being transposed down a perfect 4th, which is 5 semitones. And if I press Shift 0, it'll transpose it up in semitones. So here I'm pitch shifting it up a minor 3rd, which is 3 semitones. So the cool thing about using loops from Splice is not only do they tell you the tempo of the loop, they also tell you the original key of the loop. So you can see here that this is in F minor. I want this to be in E flat minor. So what I'll do is transpose this down 1/2 step to go to E, and then one more half step to go to E flat. By the way, I'm actually a Splice affiliate, so if you want to check out Splice and sign up for an account there, you can use my affiliate link below, and any purchases you make there, I'll actually get a kickback, and it helps support the channel. Now, before I go any further, I want to save my project. So I'll just press Command S, and this will pull up the save dialog. So you can give this a name up here. I'll just call this First Reaper Project, and I'll put this on the desktop. But what's really important here is there's two options here that I always use. The first is create subdirectory for project. What this does is it creates a separate folder with all of the included files for your project in a single folder, rather than creating just a single file to store everything. Next, I always click the Copy All Media to Project directory. This is important because it makes a copy of all of the audio files that you drag into your project. If you don't use this option and you move from one computer over to another computer, or maybe you relocated your loops and samples library, your audio files won't show up in your project. So I always make sure to check this. Next up, I'll show you how to record audio with a microphone. This also works for DI instruments like electric guitar, electric bass, and keyboards. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new track. So you can do that by either clicking track up here and clicking insert new track, or by pressing Command T on a Mac or Control T on Windows. You can also do this just by simply double clicking down here. I'll double click right here to give it a name. I'm actually going to record acoustic guitar, and then next you have to set the input for the channel. So you can do that right here. Right now it says input 1, but if you had your microphone plugged into a different channel like input 2, you would select that here. Keep in mind, anytime you're using just one microphone, this is a mono recording. You don't want to use stereo unless you're actually recording with two microphones. So I'll just set this to input 1, and then you can click here to arm the track for recording, and you'll see signal coming through the channel. That's actually me just talking right now. And then if you actually want to hear the channel while it's recording, you have to click here to turn on input monitoring. So now I can hear myself speaking through the microphone. Just make sure you use headphones while you record, otherwise you'll get a pretty nasty feedback loop. Typically what I like to do is give myself a measure or two at the beginning of the project before I have to start recording. So I'll just hit Command A to select all, and I'll move everything over to start at measure 3 rather than measure 1. So this will give me 2 measures of time to prepare myself before I start recording. You also want to turn on your metronome right here so you can keep yourself in time while you record. When you're ready to record, just press Command R on a Mac or Control R on a PC to start recording. After recording, this dialog will pop up and you can click Save All to save the recording. I'll try a second identical guitar part to double up the recording. All right, so I'll separate both of these by pressing S. So I'll just delete this excess on the front end, and you can do the same for the back end. So just separate these and then delete all this extra here. Now, in addition to a built-in trim tool on the end of each region, there's also a built-in fade tool. So I can add a bit of a quick fade out on the back end of these and a fade in on the front end of these. And this will get rid of any extraneous background noise at the front end and the tail end of these regions. Now, what I like to do with doubled recordings like this is I like to hard pan them left and right for a bit of a stereo effect. So for the first guitar, I'll pan this hard left, and for the second guitar, I'll pan this hard right. You don't have to do it 100%. You could do it like, I don't know, maybe 80%. So I'll do 80% left, 80% right. So this recording is really dry and really basic right now. We'll talk about adding effects and enhancing recordings later, but let's give this a listen with everything in. Next, I'll give you a really basic introduction to working with MIDI and using virtual instruments, sometimes called software instruments or software synthesizers. So first, I'll create a track. I'll go up to Track, and I'm going to use this option here that says Insert Virtual Instrument on New Track. Then this dialog will pop up, and it's asking you what virtual instrument you want to use. Now, unlike some DAWs, Reaper doesn't come with a bunch of stock instruments. There is one, it's called the Resynth, but it's really basic, and I don't want to use it for this project. However, there is a plethora of free VST instruments out there, and obviously some for purchase as well. One free one that I found that's pretty cool is called Cheese Machine 2. It sounds really cheesy, but it's actually a really nice string instrument. Now, I'm playing those sounds from my USB MIDI controller. A MIDI controller is generally a keyboard device that can send MIDI information into your DAW, usually over USB. I'm using a Novation Launch Key 25, so it's a pretty small MIDI controller, and it's pretty cheap as well. But in order to do this, you're going to have to set up your MIDI controller. So I'm going to close this window out. I'm going to go up to the Reaper preferences again, and instead of audio device, I'm going to go to MIDI devices. So this shows all of your MIDI input and output devices. I need to make sure that my launch key is enabled as a MIDI input device. And the way you do that is you just right click and then choose Enable Input. So I enabled the input for both of these launch key devices here. Then on your track, like we chose an audio input before, we have to choose a MIDI input. So you'll just click here, go down to MIDI, and you can either choose all MIDI inputs or you can choose a specific MIDI device. So this is helpful if you have multiple MIDI controllers hooked up to a single computer. And then with the track armed, you should be able to play your MIDI controller and hear back sound from your VST instrument. And then you just record like you normally would. I'm going to use these strings sort of like a bass instrument. Now, when you work with MIDI, you're not recording audio regions like you would with a microphone. You're recording musical control data. So a MIDI region will look a little different than an audio region. The cool thing about this is because it's just musical information, you can double-click on a MIDI region to open it up in the integrated MIDI editor, and you can see each of the notes that you recorded with your MIDI controller. Now, you can see just from looking at the front end of each of these notes that the notes are a little out of time. I played a little ahead of the grid. So it's really easy to quantize your MIDI recordings to set them in time. Quantization will correct timing issues typically at the front end of notes, but Reaper can also do this at the back end, at the tail end of notes. So this is really easy to do. Down at the bottom of the MIDI editor, set a grid value that you want to quantize to. I'm going to set quarter note. So all you have to do now is right-click and drag over all of the notes that you want to quantize if their notes aren't already selected, and then press Q, and this will pull up the Quantize Events dialog, and it'll also automatically quantize all of the MIDI notes. So you can see that the front and back end of each of these notes is quantized to the grid. So the reason why it's quantizing to the grid is because the settings are set to use grid. Now, in a future video, I'll talk about manually quantizing notes and all of Reaper's other MIDI functions and quantization functions. But for now, to keep it simple, I'll just choose use grid. I also have this set to quantize the position of notes and the note length. So if I set this to just position, you'll see that the tail end of the notes is not quantized. So I'll set this back to position and note length, and then just hit OK. Let's say that I want to loop out my whole musical arrangement one more time. So what I'll do is just hit Command A to select all, or Control A on a PC. Then I'll hold Command while I drag these over and duplicate this whole selection one time, starting right here at measure 11. So now this will play continuously and repeat itself once. So I've built out just a really basic musical arrangement. Now let's say that I want to export this whole thing as an audio file so I can listen to it outside of Reaper. So what I typically like to do is make a selection with the locators, and this selection is going to define the range that I want to export. So to export, just go up to File, Render, or you can press Option Command R on a Mac or Option Control R on a PC. Where it says bounds here, make sure you choose time selection because this will use the locator range as the export range. Then you can give this a name. I'll call this Reaper Demo 1. You can choose where you want it to be saved to. So I'm just going to choose the desktop. And then you can choose a sample rate. You can choose your output format. I'll choose WAV. You can choose your bit depth right here, and then click Render One File. After it's done rendering, I'll just click Show in Finder, and this will open up the window that the WAV file was rendered to. So that's how to get started in Reaper 5. Keep in mind that everything I demonstrated in this video is pretty basic, and in future videos, I'll show you more recording, editing, and MIDI functions. So subscribe to the channel to see more of these videos, and if you'd like to follow me on social media, you can check me out on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and if you'd like to make a monthly contribution to the channel, you can also check me out at patreon.com/MusicTechHelpGuy. Thanks for the support, and thanks for watching.